Thanks, man.
No problem.
Welcome back to When Bad Things Happen to Good People, a podcast about censorship and the arts. My name is Todd Sullivan, and my co-host is Oren Barter.
Yo.
And today we are starting our look at Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. How's things?
Not too bad. Yeah.
Good to hear.
I was a little hungover for work the day after we did that bonus episode.
Oh yeah.
Which I just felt like a complete. I was at work and my brain was foggy. Someone's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "No, I'm hungover." They're like, "It's Thursday." I'm like, why?
Yeah. So in case, just so people know what we're talking about. We're recording this a couple of days later than we intended to, and on the day that we were going to originally record this, we got together and sort of had a bit of a chat that we recorded anyway, which will turn out into either a single bonus episode or maybe a bunch of sort of like little mini or micro episodes if we sort of carve out the interesting bits that we talked about. But there will be probably some interesting, well, arguably interesting content showing up on Patreon in the next few weeks from that conversation. So keep your eyes out for that. That'll be fun and exciting. But here we are after this is our 11th episode. So we've made it 10 episodes. We've covered 2 books. No, 1 book.
One book,
2 movies.
Yeah.
And we're about to start our 2nd book. So this is exciting. And I'm excited to dig into this book, and because it's going to be our first time talking about it, I think we have more material to cover than usual. So we should probably dig right into it, unless there's anything you wanted to talk about in advance.
Let's take a big old bite out of this.
Okay. So before we talk about what we've read so far, I did take some information from Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is a brilliant source of information. I know a lot of people say you can't trust Wikipedia because people can edit it. But 99% of the time, the information there is in fact accurate, and it's also, you can tell it's accurate because most of it is cited. You know, there are sources provided and links to sources for like literally everything on Wikipedia. So here's what Wikipedia has to say about The Handmaid's Tale. The Handmaid's Tale is a dystopian novel by Canadian author Margaret Atwood, published in 1985. It is set in a near-future New England in a totalitarian state known as Gilead that has overthrown the United States government. The Handmaid's Tale explores themes of subjugated women in a patriarchal society and the various means by which these women resist and attempt to gain individuality and independence. The Handmaid's Tale won the 1985 Governor General's Award and the first Arthur C. Clarke Award in 1987. It was also nominated for the 1986 Nebula Award, the 1986 Booker Prize, and the 1987 Prometheus Award. The book has been adapted into a 1990 film, a 2000 opera, a 2017 television series, and other media. So this is not an insignificant piece of fiction. This is a book that has gotten a lot of attention, gotten a lot of awards, and is quite well regarded. It was also the 29th most banned or challenged book from 2010 to 2019. So there are people who are not fond of this book. Now, I've also got some information on some of those challenges, so we can get a sense of why this book has been challenged or banned in the past. So here's
so like
a list.
So you got a list that like shows where, when, and why.
Yeah, the Wikipedia page for The Handmaid's Tale includes a few selected examples of where and when it's been challenged. I'm just going to run through some of those.
Sure.
In 1990, it was challenged at Rancho Cotate High School in California as being too explicit for students.
Okay.
In 1992, it was challenged in schools in Waterloo, Iowa, reportedly because of profanity, lurid passages about sex, and statements defamatory to minorities, God, women, and the disabled. In 1993, it was removed because of profanity and sex from the Chicopee, Massachusetts high school English class reading list. 1998, challenged for use in Richland, Washington high school English classes, along with 6 other titles determined to be poor quality literature and that stress suicide, illicit sex, violence, and hopelessness. 1999, challenged because of graphic sex, but retained on the advanced placement English list at George D. Chamberlain High School in Tampa, Florida. In 2000, it was downgraded from required to optional on the summer reading list for 11th graders in the Upper Moreland School District near Philadelphia due to an age-inappropriate subject matter. 2001, challenged but retained in the Dripping Springs, Texas. That's a troubling name. Welcome to Dripping Springs, Texas. Senior Advancement Placement English course as being optional reading assignment. Some parents were offended by the book's descriptions of sexual encounters. Although I would argue that if you're in the Advanced Placement English class, you should be able to tackle subjects like that.
Yeah, but I mean, that's advanced English. It's not advanced emotional maturity.
I guess. And in 2012, it was challenged as required reading for a Page High School International Baccalaureates class and as optional reading for advanced placement reading courses at Grimsley High School in Greensboro, North Carolina, because the book is sexually explicit, violently graphic, and morally corrupt. And some parents thought the book is detrimental to Christian values. So, that's a little bit about what we're in for here.
Yeah, even in the little bit that we've done so far, I think that it would be a stretch to say that this is a high school book. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but I mean, if I had a kid and they were in high school, I don't know if I'd feel comfortable.
Oh, no, I totally would.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah. But see, when you say, I might agree with you that it's not a high school book in the sense that I wouldn't expect most high school curriculums to include a book like this.
Yeah, okay, that's kind of, yeah.
But that doesn't mean I don't think that it should be or it could be. But I think I would personally reserve judgment on how appropriate this is for high schools until I'd read the whole thing, because I'm also of the opinion that, you know how in films, if you have a film in the US that's rated PG-13, you're allowed to say fuck once in the film. I don't think that whether or not something is appropriate for a certain age group has anything to do with counting the number of fucks or, you know, like just really mechanical things. Like, it's about the context of everything in the entirety of the book.
Okay.
So, you know, just because, you know, for example, we have already encountered the word fuck in this book during a not entirely G-rated scene. But I don't know if I would say that that scene automatically means that this film or that this book shouldn't be for high school students. I would need to judge that against sort of the whole book entirely. Is my take.
Okay.
But, I mean, that is clearly the argument that a lot of people are giving. That, you know, the sexual content, violent content, apparently, which I don't think we've really encountered so far. And
there's a bit of, well, maybe not violent, but morbid.
Somewhat, yeah. And there is what I would say already a certain amount of anti-religious sentiment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Big. Oh, hey. What are you drinking?
Hey, how's it going?
What are you drinking, Todd?
Oh, that's a good question.
I heard you take a sip, and I was like, I don't know what he's drinking over there.
I have a Canadian Club Rye and ginger going right now.
Oh, okay. I've got Partake Stout, non-alcoholic stout
nice.
beer. Yeah.
Good.
It's actually really good. Yeah, I think I've had this before on the show.
Oh, cool. People have to, like, maybe someone out there can start keeping count of what drinks we have when. Or maybe we should include the episode descriptions. That would be fun.
Yeah.
So one thing that's very much different about this book compared to the autobiography of Malcolm X is that the chapters are much, much shorter. We covered 17 chapters over the course of this.
And I think we read like 2/3 as much.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Another thing is that so far in these 17 chapters, which equal about 100 pages, not very much has happened as far as stuff in the primary narrative. Basically, this woman who's a handmaid, she goes to the store, she gets some food, she comes home. Another time she's at the store, comes home, goes to her room. Another time she eats some food, goes to a prayer meeting, and then has sex.
Well, no, she went to the doctor, and the doctor hit on her.
Oh, the doctor. I forgot about the doctor. Yeah. But I mean, that's pretty much everything that's happened in 17 chapters. If you look just at the details of what happened.
But I mean, it does bounce around a lot.
It does bounce around a lot.
It is sometimes hard to tell what timeline you're on. You're reading one section, you're like, okay, well, this is going on. Then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, that doesn't seem right. You're in a car? You got a baby in the back? What?
And I'm sure that's very intentional.
Well, yeah.
To keep you kind of not in suspense, but in kind of confusion, about the order of things, because there are clearly multiple. So like it said at the beginning, this is a dystopian world where the government, I think, along with religious leaders, have steered society towards a more quote unquote traditional kind of family unit society where women are expected to stay at home. Men are men, women are breeders unless they can't breed, in which case, you get a handmaid. But we do spend time in the world before this as well.
Or as she likes to say a million times in this book, the before time.
The before times.
The before times. Yeah.
And for me, the very first chapter is called Night. It's a very short chapter, and it basically describes these handmaids. They're sleeping in a gymnasium of a former school. We kind of later find out that this location is where they're kind of trained for handmaid service. And they go to the different classrooms to learn different things. They sleep in the gymnasium. They're all sort of set far enough apart that they can't really effectively whisper to each other without sort of the guards or the teachers or whatever hearing them. But they do describe being able to sort of reach out to each other and hold each other's hands in the darkness to sort of give each other strength. And in my mind, I look at that as the center timeline point, her training. And then we either move forward or backward from there into these different periods.
But it's really not that big of a stretch. It's only a few years between the before times and the current timeline.
Yeah. And it will be interesting to see whether or not they go into any kind of real specific detail about how that shift happened, because it is clearly a very dramatic shift. We get to this point where, a woman is essentially owned by a man for the purposes of making a baby for the family.
And she's already been to another place. This is her second place.
Yeah. So. And it's worth noting that we don't know her name, I don't think, in the context of the story. It comes up in Margaret Atwood's introduction, but I don't think she's been actually named. But her name is Offred. And
isn't it Offred?
So I originally read it as Offred.
Mm-hmm.
But later in the book, when she encounters other women and we find out what their names are, it becomes clearer what the naming system is. So we encounter were named
is the commander's name Fred then?
That would be his first name, yeah.
So
their names are titles essentially of ownership.
Right. So she's not a person. She's just a person. She's a possession
she's
of
Fred's, baby maker.
Right.
And when I hit that point in the book where I encountered the other women's names and realized what it meant and what that meant for Fred, I felt my stomach drop, because it was like, I knew it probably the name was going to mean something at some point, because Offred is not it doesn't sound like a normal name. And I know in the introduction, Margaret Atwood talked about how it was also kind of a play on the idea of Offred. And so when I read it in the introduction, I didn't make that connection. But then, yeah, it's definitely about possession. We start to actually visit the world in part 2, which is called Shopping. And that contains chapters 2 through 6. And that's, as I said, that's the point where she basically, she goes to the kitchen, she gets the little tokens or whatever that she needs to acquire food, goes out to get food, meets up with another woman because they have to travel in pairs, I guess, so that if anyone does anything wrong, the other one is there to snitch on the other. Then they go and they get their food and then they come back. And that's sort of the gist of what actually happens. But throughout all this, there is a lot of world building. A lot of world building. There's a description of her room right at the beginning of this chapter, talking about all of the things that it doesn't have in the context of like this. The absence of these things makes this space more difficult for someone to kill themselves in this room.
Right. Yeah. There's no mirrors. The
glass that can be broken.
Glass.
Yeah. And again, that tells you so much about the state of the world and what would be going on potentially in the minds of these handmaids. They have to make the room impossible, well, not impossible, but very difficult to kill yourself in, because very clearly that's something that these women try or did try on a regular basis. Right.
But I get hung up a little bit on like, yeah, that she's building this world and it seems very entrenched, and all these rules and systems and the places seem very entrenched. But I mean, like I said, it's only been 3 years. She says that when she lost her child, or she considers her child dead because it's easier that way. Right. But when she thinks about how old her daughter would be, she would be 8. And I'm like, oh, well, that's not a whole lot of time for all of this to become so entrenched and all these rules and all these teachings. And I just like,
well, that is why I'm curious to see if they will get to a point of explaining more in detail. I'm guessing probably not, because I feel like that is sort of secondary to the story itself. But I am curious, and I didn't catch that about the child's age. That's a good point, because I've felt like the amount of time that has passed is very gray in my experience of the book, and I probably missed that reference to the child's age. That would have been more solidified about the time that's passed.
See, and I know like we talked about this before, but I'll mention it a little bit. I am enjoying the book more now that I'm as far into it as I am, but when I first started it, I really didn't like the details. The details were contradicting themselves quite a bit.
Yeah.
And, like she wants to create this dystopian future where everything's different, but then she also wants it to be very close to the past. And I feel like those things conflict with each other. And I know that you kind of explained it a little bit better to me, but I found when she first describes her outfit and how she's not supposed to see anything and how she's got these great big blinders on, and then she starts describing everything in such great detail as she's walking through it, and it's, it's like, well, can she see or not, right? Like, where is this? But you're like, well,
well, I think, the veil isn't meant to block her vision. It's the wings on the side that sort of give her that tunnel vision of only looking directly ahead.
Right, yeah.
But even then, like, she can turn her head left and right, and so she is able to see things. It's just...
But she does say, like, a couple of times, like, I can't see because of my wings or my veil, and it's like, well... I found it contradicting itself. Yeah. Quite a bit.
I mean, it might be. I think it's just a question of like, I was more inclined to just immerse myself in the world and in the story, rather than getting hung up on things like that. And it's just it's either like a different way of reading, a different way of experiencing the text, or like early on, you maybe just hit that one thing that made you question everything that came after it.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. I think it something I think it was the veil thing or the wing thing, and it popped out at me, and I think I've been a little overly analytical. Now that I'm through to chapter 17, I am really starting to enjoy this book. So
Good.
but it might be a little hard to get into at first if you're going to try and read it, and you're as anal as I am.
Yeah, because I was going to say I had zero difficulty. I was enjoying it like almost from, well, I stumbled a little bit through the first chapter because it is, again, it's so unclear what's going on there initially that, but like right away in chapter 2, just the way, and it world builds the way I like sort of science fiction or speculative fiction to world build, like to drop you right in the middle of it and start telling you things without necessarily explaining them, because a person in this world wouldn't do like, so in a little bit here, we're going to encounter a Martha. It's a woman named Rita who is what's called a Martha. Now, in a lot of bad writing, the story would at that point go, oh, maybe you haven't heard of Marthas before, so let me tell you what they are. Mm-hmm. But that's not what happens here. We're just told that she's a Martha, and we're kind of left to figure out by the context cues of what she's doing what a Martha is, which is they seem to be kind of a kitchen servant. And the Marthas wear green, where the handmaids wear red. And I did have this note down wondering whether or not, like, I don't know the history of Martha Stewart, whether or not she would have been enough of a thing in like 1985 when this was written for that to be the inspiration of the term Martha. But that is kind of my headcanon as I read this, that every time I encounter a Martha, it's like that's someone who's doing Martha Stewart type work. Another fact that comes up in this chapter 2 about the world is that people, like time, at least for the handmaids, is all measured according to bells. When a bell goes off, it's time to do this. When a bell goes off, it's time to do that. And that struck me as really interesting as well, because that takes so much autonomy away from a person. Mm-hmm. That they're not looking at their watch and going, oh, I need to go and do this thing. They're being told by a particular chime, now it's time to go. They don't even really know what time it is. All they know is it's time to engage in a particular action. And that, even just that small detail, seemed very dystopic to me. We also get a reference here to something called the colonies and people called unwomen. And this was brought up as a potentially threatening thing, that if you didn't behave properly, you might end up being sent to the colonies to live with the unwomen. And I don't know what the unwomen would be. And again, so far my headcanon is that the colonies is maybe Canada. But that's just...
No, there was something about trade with Canada, if I remember right, but I might not be remembering right.
Yeah, I don't recall.
I don't know if I agree. I mean, I'm hopefully we'll find out.
Yeah, I feel like that's something that will probably come up. I feel like she'll probably end up having to be, sent to the colonies or deal with the unwomen at some point. Mm-hmm. Once she has her tokens for groceries, she leaves the house. We're introduced to the large garden, which is sort of the domain of the commander's wife. The commander being the man of the house she's in. I got the sense that there are sort of multiple commanders, not that like there's like one the commander, that essentially he's just a commander.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's like just a general male title, like every man of a certain stature is considered a commander, because it does mention, and I think it first comes up in this chapter here, this idea of hierarchy among males, where not all males are able to get wives. When she interacts with Nick, who is cleaning one of the commander's cars, they mention that he is apparently of low status because he hasn't been issued a woman, which again I thought was a great dystopic phrasing. Women are issued to men, not of their own free will. What else do we learn about? We learn about guardians. And I think we find out later that guardians are kind of like low-level police, but they also do kind of like...
Yard work.
Yeah, they
kind of just do whatever.
Do the heavy digging in the yard, yeah.
Yeah. I think
They also mentioned...
did they meant? I'm trying to remember. Was it something like they were either too young or too old to be what they called angels, and angels were soldiers, right?
Yeah, angels were sort of like the next level up from the guardians.
Yeah, I think guardians were like I think at one point she said they're either all too old to be angels or just starting out.
Really yeah, it does say they're usually old or disabled or very young. But also that some guardians are what are called eyes, which
right.
Are most likely some kind of a spy looking for sort of specific infractions.
Well, and guardians can be eyes, handmaids can be eyes, like anybody can be eyes.
When I first read sort of that interaction when Offred first meets Nick, my first thought was like, these guys are going to hook up.
Mm-hmm.
And there is an interaction with them towards the end of these chapters that I think seems to make that likelihood even stronger. But we'll get to that when we get to that.
But she kind of you kind of get that feeling like she just wants to hook up with anybody at this point. Like, not saying like she's just like free and open for everybody, but like she's like, that's a little bit of her freedom. That's a little bit of her. She can have these desires. She can't act on them, but she can have them. And like there was the one where she was walking to the store or walking into town.
I was going to get to that. And that's
guardian.
A good point. The guardians. Yeah. Let's get to that because I think we're almost there. But I do want to quickly mention that we get this flashback of Offred watching an old religious program featuring a woman named Serena Joy. And it's revealed through that flashback that the commander's wife is this old religious person named Serena Joy.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that she's mentioned by name in this historical context makes me think that she will be much more significant to the story, but maybe to the history as well. Like, I feel like Serena Joy and her religious movement may have been
a big part of this change.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Like, and especially in the flashback when she was talking about the sort of things that Serena was, what's the word I'm looking for? She was, not picketing because she wasn't. God damn, my brain is not functioning.
Protesting?
She wasn't protesting. Like, she was rallying for these things.
Oh, yeah,
she was talking about how women should be women, right?
Yeah.
How they should be at home. And then it kind of goes back to the present, and it's going to be weird to say this, but you're totally right on the name Offred.
Yeah.
Because I've been reading it as Offred.
I was too at first, yeah.
Yeah. And she kind of like takes a stab at Serena, like, I bet you don't like that too much now. Like, not at her, but in her own head at her.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a thing, right? So, but yeah, no, I thought the same thing. That was probably part of whatever made this big change, right?
So and I do think that because of that, and because she's sort of a big character to Offred, we are going to see at least some of how that transition happened and what Serena Joy may have had to do with creating this Brave New World.
And I think it's not really it's the world because she's in it. And I think she does like kind of bring that up, like, this is the norm for us. And it's not like this is all of the United States or North America or, the world. Like, they're fighting.
There are references to fights and a war, and because the angels are on the front lines of something.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good point. It is at least in sort of the New England area, but how? Yeah, fair point. So Offred kind of hooks up with, or meets up with another handmaid so they can continue into town for their shopping together, as I said, so they can kind of keep an eye on each other. As they walk, we get references to a bunch of sort of in-world things that I don't know what they are, but I wrote them down because the names were interesting. Salvagings, Pravaganzas, Birthmobiles, and then black vans with winged eyes that nobody knew. Like, winged eyes were painted on the side of them, but that nobody knew what went on in them, and like people were terrified to like even kind of approach or encounter them. Especially like the word prayvaganza. It sounds like a big like pray celebration party.
That makes
Is likely
sense.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
As they're passing through, their IDs and stuff are being checked by the Guardians. We learn that Guardians are promoted to angels eventually, are perhaps allowed to marry, and then might even live long enough to receive their own handmaid, should they be lucky enough. And then we also find out that the Guardians are too young to be allowed to have sex, and masturbation is forbidden. And it's this moment I think you were talking about where, you know, she's kind of like really enjoying walking past them in as seductive a way as is possible in her clothing, you know, maybe giving a little extra wiggle to torment them, because that is a certain amount of power and freedom that she can still cling to, as long as, hopefully, I would think, you know, you wouldn't want to let an eye get a sense of that.
Mm-hmm. But see, this is one of those places where I get hung up, because she's talking about, you know, how, you know, they hope like they might live long enough to get their own wives and this and that. It almost seems like this has gone on for at least a couple of generations. But it's only been a few years. How does she know that he's going to eventually get his own?
Because I would imagine, because that's in the laws that they wrote, that there is this hierarchy of men, that you're the guardian, eventually become an angel. Once you're an angel, then you can wed. If you work long enough as an angel, you become a commander, and then you can get a handmaid. Like it's very simple to create that kind of a hierarchy, right?
Right, but then who selected the commanders, angels, guardians?
Like, who had to start there?
I mean, yes. I mean, obviously, this commander started as a commander.
Right? Most commanders, I'm sure, started as commanders. Nobody would intentionally like drop to the bottom of the bucket. I don't know, but I mean, if I had to guess, you know, it probably had something to do with your station out of like original society, right? Like if you worked at a gas station, you're going to be a guardian.
Right.
If you were a high-paid criminal lawyer, you might have been a commander. You know, like it really, it's just a different sort of economic hierarchy to what we already have.
Okay.
I'm guessing.
Okay, no, I can buy that. I can buy that. You're slowly swinging me, argument by argument.
As they continue to walk to the stores, we find out about a guy named Luke. She remembers that Luke and her used to walk together. Context clues from future scenes. Luke seems to have been a boyfriend that was married to somebody else. And he had an affair on his wife with Offred, and then likely got her pregnant, and then they were starting a family or whatever. And in a way, again, knowing the kind of patriarchal and puritanical society that it seems that they've built now, it's not surprising that they would have, you know, looked down on someone like Offred, who was responsible for breaking up a marriage and who maybe had a child out of wedlock and things like that. We don't know too many details about what happened to them in the final days. We've had bits of it, but we'll get to that in a little bit. And there was this interesting bit in this section talking about how in the past, when women had more freedom, they were not protected. And there's this line, and I can't remember who said it. Probably Aunt Lydia is the woman who was doing the... Yeah, Aunt Lydia is the one who was training her. This line that in the days of anarchy, which is sort of before, it was freedom to, meaning freedom to, you know, go and have sex with whoever you wanted to, freedom to drive a car, freedom to get a job as a woman. Now you are being given freedom from, which is to say freedom from being raped, freedom from having to look over your shoulder when you're walking down a dark alleyway. This is presented as a positive thing. And it's basically legislating, you know, victim blaming, right? It's all the times you were raped before, it was really your fault.
Yeah, and yeah, they had that one girl in the training where they were supposed to talk about maybe things that had happened to them
Yeah.
in the time before. And yeah, she talks about that, and everybody shames her, like who led them on? You did, right?
Well, it would be I did, because they had to
right.
own it up to themselves, right?
Right.
And now they, on their walk, they encounter a group of tourists, apparently from Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a bit that I wanted to read directly from the book. They look around, bright-eyed, cocking their heads to one side like robins, their very cheerfulness aggressive, and I can't help staring. It's been a long time since I've seen skirts that short on women. The skirts reach just below the knee, and the legs come out from beneath them, nearly naked in their thin stockings. Blatant, the high-heeled shoes with their straps attached to the feet like delicate instruments of torture. The women teeter on their spiked feet as if on stilts, but off balance. Their backs arch at the waist, thrusting the buttocks out. Their heads are uncovered and their hair too exposed in all its darkness and sexuality. They wear lipstick, red, outlining the damp cavities of their mouths, the scrawls on a washroom wall of the time before. I think what's really interesting about that is it's written as if it's a very, very sort of sexual outfit. But let's stop and remember that at the very beginning of that description, we're talking about a skirt that's below the knee.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, I mean, really, she's just encountering someone who's dressed in what would be considered, I think, pretty conventional. But it's being described as this insanely over-the-top kind of sexual outfit.
Well, in comparison to the outfit that all the other women wear.
Well, exactly. And I think that's my point, is that I think it's, again, that's another moment to show how much society has changed and how much people's perspectives of clothing and appearance in this world has changed. And then they get to the wall where they encounter men hanging from the neck, dead.
This was that morbid part I was talking about.
Yeah. And the doctors, the men had different sort of signs on them, I guess. And some of them had, I think, signs that had babies on them or fetuses.
Mm-hmm.
And basically these were men who had formerly been doctors who had given abortions, not now, but in the before time. So these guys are being punished after the fact for things that were legal at the time, which again is a good example of what's happened to this world.
Right, but why did the birth rates decline so much? Like, why is a birth such a rare thing?
That I don't know. That's something I think we're going to find out as it goes along.
Okay.
I think part of it is if you look at the hierarchy.
Yeah, who's allowed to have kids? They're older.
Who's allowed to have kids?
Yeah.
By the time they're having kids, you've got like their sperm counts are down.
Yeah.
The women, can't always successfully have kids when they're, once you're getting close to 40, it can be dangerous to have kids.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always work. So they've created a society
and then on top of that, even if the man has a decent sperm count and he's got a handmaiden, they're only having sex once a month.
Right. But they are, that's intentionally timed too. Right?
Yeah, it's
That's
intentionally timed, but it's still just, I see what you mean with the
handmaid, at least. I imagine they're probably having sex more often with the wife, maybe, but who knows?
Yeah.
And then that's the end of part 2. Part 3, which is also called Night.
Because why not? Let's just do night again.
Well, so
is it going to be like? Yeah, it's going to be like morning, night.
Basically, the way the book is broken up, and I can't remember if I read this on Wikipedia or somewhere else, but it's basically you have, part 1 is night.
Yeah.
And it's about Offred, essentially her alone experience in that gymnasium. And then you have shopping, which are, chapters 2 through 6. And then you have night again, which again is Offred sort of by herself, isolated in her room. And it bounces back and forth like that from, a period where Offred is out interacting with the world, and then where she's isolated, and then out interacting with the world, and then isolated. So, like, the next isolated one is Nap, which contains chapter 13. It's not night,
Okay.
but again, it's a similar thing. She's back in a room, she's isolated, and going through that experience. In chapter 7, we learn a couple more things about the past. She went to university with a girl named Moira, and we have a scene where they think about going out for some drinks. Without context, it's hard to really place this in time, but I suspect I got the feeling that when she was with Luke, it was after university, so I feel like Moira is earlier.
I thought so too, yeah.
Then we have a memory of her, even younger than that, going out with her mother to kind of a riot, or not a riot, but like
a book burning,
a protest where they're burning porn magazines. Mm-hmm. And then another flash of her waking up somewhere after having her child been taken because apparently she's unfit to have one. I think this is the first reference we get to her ever even having a child. And now we move on to part 4, Waiting Room, which covers chapter 8 to 12. And again, we start kind of with Offred and her companion, Handmaid, heading to town again. They're about to get some more groceries. Along the way, they encounter a funeral procession involving a mother and what seems to likely be her dead fetus. They wonder and hope that it wasn't an unbaby, which, again, that's one of those sort of names that come up that stand out as being a new thing. I don't know what it would refer to, but I'm curious to find out. They get to the shops, they get their food. The next note I have is her back at her at the commander's house, going to her room and encountering the commander outside of it,
which is not
is not normal.
Yeah.
But then he just leaves. There's no conversation among them, and so it's this question of, why was he here? Was he searching my room? Was he looking for something? What is going on? It's also important, I guess, that this is the first time, because she talks about how the room isn't her room. It's just the room, that in her mind, it's a separate thing. She doesn't want to get attached to it. But when she encounters the commander outside of it, in her mind, for the first time, it was her room. He was outside her room. He was potentially violating her space. And she makes a note of that herself inside of her own mind, is that, for the first time, it was her room.
I also liked how the room was different things for her. Like when she was waiting, it was the waiting room, right? Like when she was going to sleep, it was her bed, the bedroom. Right? Reminded me of the rugs in Malcolm X.
Yeah, interesting. And she even she talks a little bit in these chapters about going through and searching the different areas of her room, looking for something, some evidence of the previous occupant, and how she sort of, in order to kind of maximize the experience, broke the room up into sections in order to do that, not search the whole room at once and like really focus on this one area. And in doing that, she ended up coming across some words carved into a door frame, I think.
I thought it was in like her wardrobe or something.
Maybe it was in wood, obviously.
Do you have a...
I do have the words. Okay. It's Nolite te bastardes carborundorum, which I totally meant to look up, but didn't. So I'm going to do it right now.
Okay.
I don't know if we're supposed to do this. This book was obviously published before the existence of Google, and so readers either had to
go get
either know it or go learn Latin or whatever to figure it out. Oh. Oh, apparently some women have it tattooed on them.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Okay, it's a made-up phrase in mock Latin. A schoolboy's joke as it's explained in both the novel and the series. If it were a real phrase, it would roughly translate to, don't don't let the bastards grind you down.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, okay. There's a whole article on the history of it at Vanity Fair if you want to go read that. So, from there, she's off to see the doctor, who is there to sort of, I guess, check to see how fertile she is at that moment. There are times of the old female cycle that are better for getting knocked up, and so the doctor is checking for that so they can have their monthly seed injection, let's say.
Or as it's lovingly referred to in the book, the
fucking. Yeah. And of course, while she is at the doctor's office, the doctor, who is super helpful, decides to offer, he'll knock her up.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're worried about, maybe the commander's ability to, plant that old seed, I'll take care of it for you if you want. She politely declines. In part, and when I say politely declines, that's actually not a joke. She has to be very careful about how she navigates this, because if she pisses off the doctor, of course, he can now fuck up her life.
Yeah, he could change the charts and say she will never bear a child. She is.
Yep.
And then I think is this when the unwomen is brought up?
It might be brought up again. I mean, the first time was earlier when in relation to the colonies.
Right. But yeah, I think she mentioned that if she was of no value,
she'd become an unwoman?
She'd become an unwoman, I think.
Mm.
Yeah.
And at the other hand, if she takes the doctor up on his offer and the commander finds out about it, that's probably the end for her as well, because the whole point of the Handmaid is to get the her man's, the one that she is of, in this case Fred, to get his baby going. So even though being knocked up by the doctor, if you're not caught, it would at least hopefully convince Fred that you're knocked up with his child. But you got to watch the color of the eyes there sometimes. And then she's back to her room, she goes to take a bath. She has more memories about her child. She has dinner. And then I remember when I was reading this going, oh God, why is she doing this? What is this for? After dinner, she sets aside half of her butter packet in her shoe. And I was like, oh God, what is this about? I'll tell you right now, I was expecting that it was going to be used as lubricant.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought she was so not into it that,
Yeah, and I also sort of got the feeling that the commander, anyone who is running around calling themselves the commander, probably isn't caring a whole lot about, the sexual experience of their mate, and probably isn't going to be too concerned about making sure that they're properly ready, adequately prepared. And so I had this picture in my head of her having to sneak the butter up into herself. But thankfully, this is one of the rare times that the book was kinder than I was expecting it to be. So that was nice.
Yeah, she used it for moisturizer.
Yeah, well, she used it as a skin moisturizer later. There's a nice bit about how it'll go rancid and, she'll end up smelling like cheese, but at least it's natural, kind of a thing. Which, it's interesting because I think, again, it shows that kind of really difficult position that women in this world are put in. And I think, again, it's a very reasonable thought as far as if men were building a world for them and for what they thought might be good for women, they wouldn't necessarily consider these sorts of things. Like, she's got to make sure that her skin remains soft, because otherwise the commander probably isn't going to want to touch her.
No. So she actually said that it has like her face and her looks, it doesn't matter. She's just there as a vessel to produce a child. That's her position as a handmaid.
In theory, yes. Okay. But like, don't you think that like the commander is going to prefer a woman with softer skin, a woman who doesn't have, dry, flaky skin or creases under her eyes or things like that? Like,
but he didn't even see her face when they were when they were doing the thing. And she does mention the reason that she does that is because if it doesn't work out, then at least she still has her looks, right? Or something like that. Let me find that. Yeah, she rubs the butter on her face and her hands. Such things are considered vanities. We are containers. It's only the insides of our bodies that are important.
Mm-hmm.
The outside can become hard and wrinkled for all they care, like a shell of a nut. This was a decree of the wife. Okay, I can see because this is like the wives want them to not look attractive. Mm-hmm. She says things are bad enough as it is. And then she also says, as long as we do this, butter our skin to keep it soft, we can believe that we will someday get out, that we will be touched again in love or desire.
Yeah, okay, fair.
Yeah.
So it does seem like it's more of something that she does for herself, and much like, maybe those moments walking seductively near the Guardians, this is sort of one of those private moments where she's able to still retain some kind of freedom and autonomy and do something for herself.
There's also, in this buttering scene, she has, one thing I will give her, some great analogies and similes. Similes? Yeah, that's when you're like, this thing's like this thing.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But this one I thought was actually kind of funny. Buttered, I lie on my single bed, flat like a piece of toast.
Nice, yeah. And I will say, yeah, no, I'm really digging the language of this. It's, I sometimes like really simply written books. Mm-hmm. When language gets too flowery for me, I can kind of get bored of it. But when you're able to tell and paint a picture really, really simply, I think that's particularly captivating. And I think Margaret Atwood does a really great job of doing that here. So all the stuff that was happening just a moment ago with like taking the bath and eating dinner, that's all in preparation for meeting the commander and having another, attempt at planting seed. The next section, part 5, Nap, contains chapter 13, and this is sort of her killing time before that moment. So she kind of has a nap and kind of dreams, kind of remembers things. We have more memories of Moira, but now Moira is arriving at the school for handmaids. They kind of start sneaking off into the bathroom to like whisper at each other through this hole in the wall.
A glory hole.
You said, well, I got the sense that it was kind of on the ground, but maybe
okay, or like a peeping hole or something.
Yeah. And that's probably what it was, because, this would have been a school at one point, so it wouldn't surprise me if the boys had, like, chipped a hole through the bathroom wall to be able to peer in the girls' room. Then memories of her and Luke in an empty house and getting angry phone calls from Luke's wife. And then another memory of her running away with her child, running through the woods, and then sort of falling and having that child taken away from her. And then we get to part 6, Household, which contains chapters 14 through 17. A bell rings, of course, it's always a bell, and the household goes to gather in the sitting room. Everyone's waiting for the commander. They make him, I think actually the wife makes a point of the fact that he's always late. Everyone has to sit around and wait. Fred has a moment remembering, traveling in the car with Luke and with the little girl trying to get away.
And it seemed like trying to get away from the world that she's now stuck in.
Yes.
Yeah.
They talk about things like faked passports or faked documents. And again, just sort of dropping those little hints of detail about what's going on. We don't know exactly what it is that they're trying to get away from at this point, but it's likely, is in relation to things like I mentioned before, like, child out of wedlock, having broken up a marriage, things like that. Because again, like, if they're hanging doctors who performed abortions in the time before, what are they going to do to, like, this homewrecker woman who destroyed a perfectly good marriage and also, got pregnant out of wedlock? So, Commander arrives. He reads a Bible passage, and I get the sense that it's always the same one. Always this one about. I'm not good with Bible passages, but it's about like this woman who is unable to get pregnant and basically says to her husband, "Take my sister or my servant, whatever it is,
her maid."
Yeah.
I think that's where the handmaid came from.
Exactly. That's where this whole idea of if your wife can't create a baby for you, get someone else, because it's right in the Bible. The Bible says you can do that. And I'll tell you, I actually thought that this moment with everybody standing around was when the attempted knocking up was going to happen.
Yeah, I kind of thought that too. I was like, oh, okay, so like everybody has to be there.
Yeah, it's all just, and again, like the section is called household, and I thought that was part of it. That maybe it's to make sure that, because again, I feel like there would be certain rules around this sort of thing. That, like, ideally, the commander is not supposed to enjoy it. It's simply supposed to be a mechanical process, right? Mm-hmm. And so maybe you need to have those other eyes there to make sure that he's not enjoying it, to make sure that he's not doing anything he's not supposed to. But, in fact, thankfully, it is not quite that. It is a little bit weird where Fred is kind of lying back on the bed in the arms of
Serena,
the commander's wife, Serena, while the commander fucks her. And, that's exactly the way it's described in the book. It's described as fucking. So, guys, don't give us shit for using that word here. I know we try to be a G-rated podcast most of the time.
No, we fucking don't. Do we?
But we need to say fuck here because it's in the book. And yeah, no, that was a joke. Not a G-rated podcast at all. But I just try to picture that situation of, like, just sort of lying back, being held by this wife of the man that's fucking you. Everybody's hoping that you'll get pregnant, but also that she is resenting you for being in this position. Yeah. And in fact, when they're done, she mentions that she's supposed to, like, stay, like, curled in a ball or something for 10 minutes afterwards in order to increase the likelihood of getting pregnant. But Serena's just like, get out.
Yeah. And also, like, during, like, it's supposed to be, she's in Serena's arms so that they are of one flesh, I think is how it was described in the book. But Serena is, like, digging her nails and her rings into Fred's hands. And
that's taking the one flesh thing a little too far.
Yeah.
You don't have to actually get physically under my flesh.
But, like, that just shows a level of uncomfortable that Serena has for the situation, right?
Yeah, totally. And then after that happens, we get what is maybe this only strikes me this way because this is where we cut off the reading, but kind of one of the most intriguing moments of the book so far. Offred sort of gets up in the middle of the night, just wanting to act out against the commander, and she decides she was going to like go out into the house and steal something.
I think was it at the commander, or was it more at the commander's wife?
Well, I think it was,
or just the whole thing. Yeah,
it's really, I think, the whole thing. It's the situation. It's the family that she's stuck being a part of.
If she can steal one little thing and get that, like, have a little bit of power over them.
Exactly. It comes back down to like this is that little bit of power that I can have. I can take this thing, they'll never know, and it will. It's insignificant, but it's meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm.
And when she sneaks out, she runs into Nick. And there is this kind of moment between them. I don't remember if did they kiss or...
I thought they did, but then the rest of the interaction kind of made it seem like they didn't.
Yeah.
Because it did say, like, our lips met. But, yeah, I was a little confused by the time I finished that section.
So, but either way, whether they kissed or not, like, it definitely sold that kind of intense passion between them as a contrast to the kind of mechanical fucking that was going on just earlier in the chapter. Here, Offred is encountering somebody that she legitimately wants, is physically attracted to. Doesn't go anywhere then. I'm still saying it will. I'm calling that. But at the end of it, Nick says he wants to see you. And then tomorrow. Now, Offred...
Well, she asked Nick, she's like, what are you doing here? Because Nick's not supposed to be walking around either.
No, exactly.
Right? And she's like, well, Nick, what are you doing here? And then, yeah, he's like, yeah, he wants to see you. So do you not think it's the commander?
I don't.
Oh. Well, that's intriguing. I just assumed the commander. I was like, oh, okay.
See, and to me, and again, I could be wrong, but there's two reasons I don't think it's the commander. One is that it's not confirmed in this that it is, so there is that room to question. And just from a perspective as a writer, I feel like that's something I would do if I wanted to make you think one thing but actually deliver another. The other reason is that he's the fucking commander. If he wants to see her, he should be able to just go see her. Although, again, that might play into the rules of engagement in this world.
Well, and you remember that scene where she calls the room hers, and then because
he was outside of it, and that's improper, and that doesn't happen. So
and then he starts walking towards her, and she's like, "He's not supposed to do that."
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So maybe it is. Maybe it is the commander. I mean, I'm going on a limb here, making my vote. I don't think it is.
Okay. That's intriguing because, like I said, out of all the people that would want to see her and would have the ability to say, hey, Nick, go tell her I want to see her.
Yeah.
The commander. Right? But yeah.
It also feels like this is a perfect time in the story to introduce a new character.
You know what? You're swaying me again.
Well, no. It's better if we have two different opinions here, because then we can go into the next section and find out who was right.
I think it's not even going to be a man.
Well, I think he said he wants to see you, so...
I know, just being an asshole.
And I don't think there's a lot of transgender people in the...
No, because somebody actually got hung for, what was it, gender...
I don't remember.
Yeah, there was a term for it. Gender treason or gender treachery or something like that.
Yeah. And that brings us to the end. And it's as you talk about gender treason and gender treachery, it just again reminds me of how fascinating I am finding this book now that I finally have gotten around to reading it. This is something I've meant to read for years, just knowing sort of its pedigree and how, the awards it's won, as well as the controversy around it. As I've probably mentioned before, I am drawn to controversial subjects and products. So I'm a little ashamed that it's taken me this long to finally get around to reading this. But I've been really enjoying it so far. I know you haven't quite matched my levels of enjoyment, but I hope you're at least enjoying it enough that you don't think the next 2 weeks will be too painful.
No. Like the last, I'd say 7 chapters just kind of flew by. Like I was like, oh, damn, okay.
Yeah.
Bam. So,
and they fly by really well too because of the length of them. Like when you're only reading like a 5-page chapter, you see go boom, 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 and then be like, oh, I can do one more.
Yeah.
And I think what we found is that there's been a shift. The early chapters had way more like dense dumps of world building with very little happening. And in sort of the last half of the chapters we've read, it's kind of reversed because we're now in that world. We don't need to get so much world building done, and the actual events that are taking place can breathe a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes for better reading as well.
You know what? I might honestly just reread like quickly what I've read so far and just try to get it in a different headspace.
Though, while we're here, if people are wanting to read along with us, we did cover chapters 1 through 17 here. In the next episode, we will be talking about chapters 18 through 30. That will take us through part 7, Night, part 8, Birthday, part 9, also Night, part 10, Soul Scrolls, and part 11 called, you guessed it, Night. That's next week. All right, so let's wrap this up. Thanks for listening. We have a Discord now. If you want to come and visit us on Discord, we are at discord.com/blah blah blah media. That's BLAH media. That is sort of an umbrella site to cover both this podcast and the podcast that I'm doing with Carlos Sia called Half Cut Conspiracies, where we have a few too many drinks and talk about the crazy world of conspiracy theories. You can toss some money our way at Patreon. Did I say Patreon or did I say Discord? I think I said we're at Discord. I meant Patreon.
Right, you can find us on Discord.
You can. It's challenging to find us on Discord. You have to go to our Facebook page. At Patreon, we are blah, blah, blah media. And yeah, if you like what we're doing, you can throw us $2 a month, $5 a month. Help us pay our server costs. Help us, buy a coffee for when we're editing or buy a drink for when we were recording. And if you don't want to do that, that's okay too. It's your money. It's a difficult time in the COVID-19 world, and every penny counts. So maybe keep those dollars if you don't have them to spare. It's all good. Any final thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, I just if the rest of the book is going to continue on like these last 7 chapters did, I think I'm really going to like this book. If we get into like maybe a bit more like, I don't know. I think it's just me. I don't think it's the book. I think it was just
It's not you, Margaret Atwood, it's me.
Something, I don't know if it was like I started reading it in a bad mind frame, or something just kind of stood out to me right at the very beginning, and it just like it was like a thorn in my side, and I couldn't pull it out.
No, I definitely agree that it's you.
Yeah, no.
I had a great time with the book. It's all you, man.
Absolutely. But I mean, there's a lot of things. I fucked up with my notes. I thought I was taking notes. I thought I was taking like pieces of the book and saving them, but I wasn't. Yeah. There was so much like just little pieces of language that I wanted to bring up that just helped kind of bring everything forward. And you mentioned that too. She's so great at that. Mm-hmm. I think I downplayed my enjoyment on this episode. So yeah, looking forward to the next one.
Excellent. Well, until next time then, I'm Todd Sullivan.
I'm Oren Barter.
This has been When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Go read a fucking book.